Welcome to The Lost Signals Discusses Film and TV. Using the revolutionary Manzur-Ramosi-Thurlow scale,
or MOTS,
we scrupulously review these art forms with an emphasis on narrative structure. Join us for another entertaining episode. Hello, and welcome back to The Lost Signals Discusses Film and Television and Literature. Hey, we're here for a combo episode because this week we watched and read the novel and movie I Am Legend. Novel written by Richard Matheson. Movie starring Will Smith, as you may well know.
Director, yeah.
He's right over here. So we're going to start off with we're going to do this a little bit differently, but before I explain that, we're going to start off with a funny log line. I'm going to throw it over to our good man, Dara O'Brien.
I know at the end there are people here. Yo, you're a fucking legend.
So, let's kind of talk about how we're going to do it. We're not exactly going to give our reviews like a standard.
It won't be a standard
down the line.
Yeah.
We'll give you our scores at the end, but I think we're going to have more of an open discussion about these two, how they relate to each other.
Yep.
And we'll talk about
or don't relate to each other,
or don't, and because they are very different. And we'll talk about kind of the topics that we usually talk about as well. But I think that I'm going to start with just kind of saying, let's talk about the plot and see what we thought about these two different plots and which one we like better and how they kind of related, how they diverged from each other. So I'm just going to get started on this one. I'll assign topics as we go because
go for it.
We neglected to do that beforehand. But
the saddle breakdown.
Yeah, exactly. We screwed up. It's fine. It happens all the time. But so for the plot, they are actually pretty different in terms of plot, and they diverge further and further as the plot goes on, I think. But both of them are, the protagonist, Robert Neville, who is in the book. I don't think he's a doctor, right? He's just like an interested guy. Yeah, he's just a guy who's interested in science.
One of the big differences that we'll speak about. Yeah.
In the movie, he's a doctor in the military. He's like an attorney general or something.
Lieutenant Colonel.
Lieutenant Colonel Doctor. Yeah.
He's very high up in the ranks. So he's very much more doing like hard science in the movie as he goes on. Which is an interesting kind of thing, turn. I actually kind of like that turn that they did in the movie as opposed to the book. In the book, it's just like, well, I guess I'll teach myself. I guess there's a bacteria in the book. So like, and it was a virus in the movie, a bacteria in the book. But he's like, I'll just teach myself about bacteria and try to cure this, which is bold, but I'm not sure if it would ever actually work.
Well, when you have nothing to do but read, I mean, you might as well learn all about
become a bacteriologist.
True.
But the other thing is, like, in the book, you had the room to kind of that you could work this in. That you needed to kind of explain what was going on, what was behind it. Because when the movie was made in 2007, we understood a lot more as a culture about viruses and so forth. So all you needed was doctor exposition at the beginning and then kind of fed it to you as we went along. And then, whereas in the book, science was not these were not in the common culture as they are, now. And, definitely not as many plague movies back then when the book was written. Narratively it worked for the book, and it definitely would not have worked for the movie. So I agree with you, Steve-O. That wasn't a bad license to take.
But the thing is, part of the book I really enjoyed was him figuring out the science. And like, for instance, when he's looking into like how to work with microscopes, And he's like, oh, this will be easy to do. I know how to work my scopes. And then he's like, oh, I have no idea what I'm doing. Let me actually go out and test this out and create him figuring out this stuff. I would actually have liked to see that in the film, but that's just my nerdy self for that. I understand how more of a pop cultural range they would want to give, like, oh, he knows everything beforehand, so they don't have to explain anything.
And I agree with you, Ian, except there's one disease you're not accounting for, and that's Hollywood. Hollywood will not. You cannot take away from the action to be cerebral. But no, Ian, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, I want to back that up. Like, one of the parts of the novel I thought was most interesting was the fact that he was not a trained scientist or anything. He was just some random guy who happened to survive. And a lot of it, like, I thought that was interesting is because he delves into, like, the mythology of it. Like, he's trying to figure it out, whereas the movie just is, like, assuming that here it is, it's a virus, and boom, that's all you need to know. This guy is a military, both trained in the military and also a scientist. So, yeah, it's, like, maybe a bit more... not down to earth, I want to say, but like, given that being the setup, they don't have to delve in as much. Like, that's all you need to know. And yeah, he has a lab and so forth. But I thought it was more interestingly organic in a sense of Neville in the story, like trying to like eventually come to a point where, all right, let me try to apply some logic to it. Because, for example, like in the book, garlic repels the vampires, like things like that. Like traditional superstitions related to the myth of the vampire do in fact seem to be part of it. But there also, he discovers an actual germ, bacteria, that's causing it, that somehow they all correlate. Whereas, again, in the Will Smith joint, if you will, it's known. Like, the world already knows what it is. He just happens to be the one survivor who's trying to now figure it out.
Yeah.
But the problem with the film is, and this is a problem with the film, is it's based upon, it's a remake of a Mega Man, which was based upon, which is a bastardization of I Am Legend. So, I mean, it's like they kind of took
a copy of a copy, essentially.
Yeah, but they took the vampire element out of it. Because I agree with you. To me, that was one of the most fascinating parts of the book, was the fact that he had to explain myth and then decide why certain myths came to be. Yeah. And like, garlic did not work once injected, but it did cause like a skin irritation.
Yeah, it was like an allergen to them, essentially, like a very potent one.
And I'm not doing that just to trash the movie, but I think the distinction has to be made that, while you and Ian, I 100% agree with, and why the book is superior is but the movie is, they're not, like, that's the part of the problem with the movie is they try to capitalize on the zombie craze. So they decide to make it more like a zombie film.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah.
And so therefore when you took away the vampire mythos, you took away all of that. Everything that we're talking about, everything that made the book really interesting, you took that away.
I don't know about that. I mean, I see these creatures in both as zombies. They're not like true vampires. They're much closer to zombies than they are vampires. Just because they react to garlic and like have the zombie like weakness or the vampire weaknesses doesn't mean that they don't act like. But the thing is, this predates Romero's zombies, right? So this is before zombies are a thing. Like if that book, it did influence all the Dead movies, right? But like if that book came out after Night of the Living Dead came out, these would be called zombies, not vampires. 100%. Like it's like just because they have the same weaknesses as vampires doesn't make them anything akin to any of the your standard vampire.
No, because he did say that the bacteria, the germ, whatever it is, created the canines in the humans. Like it was like
they have that in the movie too.
Yeah, but barely so. I mean, barely.
They mention it once in the book, I think.
Yeah, but it built up to that. I mean, the whole point was that bacteria, germs mutate. This thing was mutating the human body and didn't just make a monolith. I mean, there were different stages of it, whereas opposed to in the director's cut of the movie, they kind of hinted at the fact that there was, different levels of these creatures. In the book, they really, the whole point of the book was that there was a distinction between these creatures.
To quote Scott here, I'm going to meet you two in the middle and come up with, is that in a sense, you're right, Steve-O, in that Robert Matheson was codifying what we would know as zombies later on, but he was using the vampire mythos to build off of that. Whereas I Am Legend, the film, where Matheson was unburdened by previous works, I Am Legend is informed by the zombie movies that came before it.
Sure.
So it was restrained in, because the thing is, if they dealt in the science of what makes zombies work, I think people would have, especially general audiences, would have viewed it as almost redundant, because we already know what zombies are. Where Matheson is creating his own monster,
right?
I like that, and I think another important distinction is that in the novel, the vampires or the monsters can talk, like they have sentience to them, like to a degree, whereas at least it's a lot less in the film, where they're just basically swarming. So I think that's a more interesting angle.
That is true.
They didn't really explore, right? I mean, one of the more humorous things to me is in the novel, Neville is constantly graded by the fact that his former neighbor and work friend is like calling for him to come out so they can kill him, right? Like,
yeah.
So like I'm just saying they're able to be more human-like than the zombies that we've come to know, even if for sure that Matheson influenced that kind of stuff, well before it was established.
Absolutely.
So I'm just saying that was an interesting angle to me.
I think that you're right. I mean, like I find the book to be much more nuanced than the movie is, but I will say that I like the explanation for why he's surviving better in the movie than I do in the book. Like in the book, it seems like this guy is, maybe he gets lucky for a while, but like he just seems to constantly get lucky, and also figure out how to like sanitize. Like he doesn't have a sanitary workstation. Like he doesn't have a lab that he works in. He's just like, I'm going to like throw some shit on a slide and whatever. Looks like a bacteria to me.
He fails because of that initially with like the sand.
Sure.
He actually has to make a sterile environment to deal with his the dirty environment around him. So I think that they do justify I think they take a very measured approach to justifying why he reached the state he was at.
I guess I'll say I give it like kind of an like eye rolling, like, yeah, I know that you want to think that if you survive the apocalypse, you're going to be able to do this stuff, while being a drunken idiot and like, like, but like, at the same time, like, come on, man, like scientists couldn't figure this shit out, but this guy does, given more time.
Well, and that's why I think is interesting about the film, in that they went with an appeal to authority. That, of course, a man who's his military experience and scientific experience would be the sole survivor, versus the everyman that
just happenstance is there.
Maybe luck. Yeah, luck does play a part of it.
Well, luck plays a part in both, I think. Yeah.
But also,
it's more justifiable in the mind that the Will Smith type character would survive versus a Joe Bob Bim.
It's less of a suspension of disbelief.
I'm not. Well, perhaps survive just because he is training in survival, but like more so that he would be able to find an actual some kind of cure, or like be able to work on a cure because he's actually a scientist and a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
No,
it's an appeal to authority. Like the thing is, we believe that people who are trained are more likely to. I just think it's a natural inclination of.
I mean, because that's true. Because scientists and doctors are more likely to find cures for things than random people, right?
I mean,
I agree with that. Yes,
but
probably.
But I think that's also we're kind of skipping ahead to. If I were to say there was the bias of that kind of thing going into the novel, where they're talking about how the limits of the scientific mind, but that's hopping into themes.
Sure.
Yeah, but more so in the book, it didn't. It seemed like society could not quite comprehend what was going on. Like there was a lot of denying what was happening to it. So. And by the time they pretty much twigged to it, the damage had already been done. It was too late. Whereas like in the movie, which understandably so, if you take away the assumption that, monster movies have been in the zeitgeist, you also have to take into account, social media, the way communication works, the fact that a doctor in California can communicate with another doctor in France, even, in 2007, like we are now. So, I mean, it makes more the book as it's told,
More plausible, you're saying, into that.
make it in this
angle.
day and age wouldn't quite work in the same way, just because of the societal construct.
True.
I got you. There's one other little thing that it was in the novel that I thought was interesting that was not explored in the film. Not that I'm saying it needed to be, but the dust storm thing, which was heavily implied to be some kind of fallout from some nondescript war, which was related to the backstory of it. So, it plays a little bit of a part when Neville from the book tries to figure out how the germ or the bacteria spread so fast. I thought it was cool that he put that together,
and why it was nocturnal, right? I think because the dust storms happen at night, and it made the hosts nocturnal because
and it affected the germ in such a way that it retreats from sunlight or strong UV light. But I just thought that was a little thing that was cool about it, but little touch there.
Well, yeah, but that the fears of the 50s were nuclear war and all
it's
that.
Certainly heavily influenced by that mindset at the time.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so which wouldn't necessarily apply to a 2007 level.
No, that's fair.
Also, in the 50s, sandstorms were more prevalent in Southern California than they were in the 70s in Southern California. So,
sure. Doesn't the book take place or the novel take place in England? I think.
No, it takes place in Southern California.
Does it? Okay.
Yeah. In the 70s. In
the 70s. In the future of the 70s.
In the future. The distant future
of 1972.
Anyway.
All right, let's talk about the themes of this because we've been talking about the plot for a very long time. So,
sure.
Ian, why don't you kick us off with themes? Because you've mentioned it a bit before.
So I've been looking into modernism and postmodernism recently, and I feel that the novel or the novella of I Am Legend is very postmodern work in that it is deconstructing the scientific truths. The idea is that in modernism there is truth, and it can be discovered as built off of the Renaissance thinking of Enlightenment thinking, where there's actually truth. And this is dealing with moral relativism. The main character believes that he is right in all of his actions because he's human, and he
therefore justified it.
Thus, any action he takes against the monsters. And what's interesting is, his beliefs are challenged throughout. His assumptions are challenged throughout, but the assumption that he is right and the other is wrong is never challenged until the very end, until he's proven directly. Whereas the film kind of, especially the theatrical ending, actually kind of reverses that, saying that Will Smith, no matter what proof they sprinkle throughout that the monsters are anything different, at the end of the theatrical cut they are just monsters.
100%
and I think that it goes back to the eras that these were filmed in when you're at the height of your civilization's power. You don't want moral relativism because you don't want you don't want to look at the enemy as anything more than just monsters to crush. When during the Cold War, America and Russia kind of had an equality to them, and this was kind of a look at perhaps the people we think are monsters aren't monsters at all. Whereas I think in I Am Legend, it's more of, or again, the theatrical release is, no, anything I do is justified. And I guess so as a final summation of this, my point for this, I think that moral relativism can forgive the sins of your enemies, but reverse it. But believing in the truth of yourself can forgive a lot of sins that you do against them. And I think that's maybe what they're looking at with this work.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting difference. And I noticed it, but I think the way you flesh it out, it says it real nicely. And there's another thing that, so I'd never seen the film version of this one until today. I knew of it, just something I skipped, didn't get into it back in the day when it came out. So I thought the character of Anna would be equivalent to the character of Ruth. I thought she would be I'm actually one of the, let's say, an advanced infected, existing and able to function, highly quote unquote normally versus a, normal human a la Will Smith and Robert from the book. So I thought that was just, again, there was more subtleties, I think, to the novella than there are, and especially related to that.
But where Ruth is, in a sense, a spy, Anna in this is a Christian and she's
Caricature
and
almost,
especially in the
too.
actual release, she is proven correct.
Yeah,
that,
she's like she's a
there is
savior, right?
fate.
Yeah,
She's
Christian caricature is right on the money, Scott.
Yeah, and I think like that just makes it like so it makes it fall a lot flatter because there's no dynamic to it. So good, Chris.
But the interesting thing about Ruth is Ruth kind of comes to the same conclusion that Neville does. That she's just like, I was here to spy on you, but when I was hugging you and I was comforting you, I was loving you. In other words, once you get to know the other, you realize that you have more in common. You have the same fears. You have the same capacity for hate and for forgiveness, which was, to me, the purpose, which validated Ruth's presence as a character. She actually added a dynamic and actually added hope, which,
She was
Neville.
an actual character.
Yeah, good point. She was an actual character as opposed to Anna, who was, I have no idea why she was there except to just because we needed a woman and a child.
because Ruth was in the book. That's why she was there. And,
But why would they?
and whoever wrote this screenplay didn't know what she was for.
No,
really.
exactly. Well, it's because they based it on a Mega Man.
I never saw a Mega Man. Is it a similar situation in that one with
I
Anna?
think so. I actually can't remember. I've seen Omega Man exactly once many years ago, so I don't remember that exact
All
detail.
right. Well, it doesn't really matter because we're not really talking about that one, I guess. But
for that version. Yeah.
like I feel like the only reason that Anna was in this was because Ruth was in the original book, right? And they needed they needed a character that filled that position, and they didn't actually understand what the point of her was,
And therefore did not fill
Seemingly.
that position.
right? And they were like, "Well, we want to change this to fit this other narrative," but yeah, I don't know. It just seemed like she was really
just
out of
didn't
place from the
work.
start.
Yes.
The little kid was, well, I guess that's more
He
of
wasn't even a
a
character.
supporting, but like, yeah, I guess we're kind of getting off topic with themes, but what I wanted to say
No, they
was
stick
like,
too closely, but
this is an interesting thing because it's almost like the hard-boiled version of like a vampire, the book anyways, like the hard-boiled version of like a vampire, like Dracula almost, like, right? The like hard-boiled 50s detective version of that almost.
yeah, I mean, he
But-
references quickly, like sort of humorously, if you remember in the novella, like the actual like Bram Stoker's Dracula, and like he's
Yeah.
like, aside from being economic treats, he'd also like start a lot of the superstition around vampires.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
the thing is, Steve-O, talking about the supporting characters or lack thereof is important because going to Ian's point, even Cortman, I mean, the fact that he did not like to see the mob essentially kill Cortman. He wanted to, if Cortman was going to die, he wanted somebody who, for lack of a better word, cared about him.
Deserved to kill him.
Yeah.
I think that's what he wanted.
But he had developed this weird symbiote. He built this weird relationship with him while he was his tormentor the whole time. He actually had still an inkling of caring for him. So the supporting characters, I mean, even to the no-name vampires, they served more of a purpose in the book to the greater theme than anybody besides Will Smith did in the movie.
To back up your point, this is, I think, a very important thing. Look how both of these characters address the vampires. In the book, he personalizes them with his neighbor. He constantly calls him Ben.
Ben Cortman, yeah.
And he sees gender in them. Will Smith's character purposely dehumanizes them, especially in the end scene when Anna says, "Oh, look at her," and he goes, "It." And they have completely different viewpoints of approaching the vampires completely. One is going to protagonist a little bit, sorry, but in the book, he's more feral himself and not much different than the chaotic creatures out there that he identifies with versus the stoic scientist who looks at them as non-human creatures. And that goes right to your point, Chris.
Yeah, I think that's all
I
very well
completely
said.
agree with
covers
that.
a lot of ground.
And
all right.
the sad thing is, before we leave this, is if they had made that Anna's character to make her, to make Will Smith see them as something more than an object, she would have actually been a character.
Yeah, it would have been a point of her being in the film at all. True, I agree with that.
Mhm.
God, Steve-O.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have too much more to say about themes. I think that you guys have said a lot, and made very good points.
I think those are the big differences, and like it's pretty clear, like when you compare them back to back. So
yeah, so let's talk about antagonists. Let's talk about the characters, really. Like I'm going to kind of combine these three.
Yeah, that's
for this because we're not going as strict on this one, and so we got the antagonists, which we might all name something different. I don't know. Like it's probably not, but like
vampires.
You could have a couple of different things. The protagonist, Neville, I think we would all agree.
Yeah,
and then the supporting characters, which we've already kind of talked about. So, Chris, why don't you start us off with your ideas about the characters?
Yeah, my ideas. I'm going to start because Neville's obviously the protagonist, and we did discuss supporting with regard to theme. I'm interested in the antagonist, to be quite honest with you, because I think in the book it was really important to have Ben Cortman there because he was the personification of the internal torment that Robert Neville was facing. I mean, to be quite honest with you, in the film, were it not for Will Smith, because he was great in this, the movie would have fallen apart a lot sooner than it did. But in the book,
he carries a lot of the film.
They tried to do a Cortman thing, and it was like so depersonalized that it was bullshit, right?
Yeah. But in the book, all you have is the descriptions of Neville and what his inner turmoil is. But to actually have somebody outside his window, an itch he can't scratch, he cannot go out there and face him. The time he's out there, he has to go out and look for him during the day and can never find him. And turns out he was, in the chimney across the street from him for like 3 years. But what I'm saying with the antagonist in the book is Ben Cortman, but more what Ben Cortman represents rather than him as a character.
Yes, rather than him, like specifically, like again, what he sort of stands for, like as a personification of all the other, like the pressures against Neville in that instance. Yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, like, so I also think that it's not the biggest difference in the world, but the fact that like I thought you might bring up the dog thing, Chris, where in the film he starts off like having at least a companion of some sorts, whereas in the novel there's a big section of it in which it explores his like extreme loneliness and his like removal from human contact and human companionship, which feeds into his psyche, thus his character, which I thought was an interesting exploration, where you don't really get that, or you get, again, a very superficial version of it in the film.
Well, in the dog also plays a completely different role in there.
Yeah, exactly.
It's granted, I think it's a smart move to give something for
he needs to play off of something.
Yeah,
sure,
just like in Castaway, they had Wilson soccer ball or volleyball, whatever it was, whatever ball it was. But the dog's purpose in there and death switches thing where it's more of a survival type aspect in the book. This one, it's more reason for us to hate the vampires that they took the one thing Will Smith had away from him.
Yeah.
Even though it is Will Smith's fault for falling into the trap. But however, again, the purpose of them narratively changes to match their themes.
Sure, but I mean, I don't disagree with that. I just think it's not as effective, or at least it wasn't as impactful to me. But even though if they're coming at it from different angles and using it for a different purpose.
Oh, I think the book's better, but that's just me.
I like in the book. It kind of foreshadows or parallels his interaction with Ruth, because he's so starving for companionship with the dog. He's willing to do anything, but by the time he gets through, he goes out and finds her, but he's beyond companionship. Whereas having the dog with Will Smith was a really smart move because, obviously given the constraints of the way Hollywood's run now, and I'm sorry if I'm going to be sarcastic, but it's a different medium and it's a different time. So to have him start out with the character, and Ian, I agree with you. It's one more thing the vampires took away from him. It also shows how much he relied on this creature for companionship, and which would have been more interesting if the dog had actually died a little earlier in the film, so you could see him more lose his mind. So when he went nuts on the pier, I mean, it was kind of more.
Yeah, it was really bang bang, right?
Yeah, it was.
It was more earned. Yeah,
exactly.
Although I have to say that my favorite parts of the film were the middle section of it, where he, especially when it was Zach, the mannequin moves.
Jack.
Is that the chat for him?
Jake.
Jake, whatever it is. The mannequin moves and he's losing his mind. And those moments I felt really matched the tension that was built throughout the book.
Yeah.
To be fair though, I listened to the audiobook version of I Am Legend, and that's fantastic. I recommend checking
really
that
good
out.
version.
Nice.
Sure.
Because
check it out.
the guy speaks with such passion and really sells the characters for that. But the tension's very high in the thing. But nonetheless, that character, I want to talk about the protagonist for a little bit. I like Neville a lot better in the book because his isolation feels very real. Where only, as I just mentioned, momentarily does Will Smith's isolation.
There are only flashes of it.
And when he meets with Anna and Ethan, I really enjoyed the fact that he was almost incapable of talking with them initially because he's been isolated for so long.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it was a fine portrayal, like in both. But like I said, just in general, this is going to be true of many things that we just said about the novella versus the film. That it's just more fleshed out. There are more subtleties to it, more nuances. Therefore, I can appreciate it more, even if like it's still perfectly fine. And yeah, Will Smith's performance, like you said, Chris, was damn solid. Like he was a good casting choice for sure. It's just that it's not as well rounded, I guess, or I did not get as much enjoyment out of following this character, even though they're perfectly fine and no real complaints on that end, just not as good as the original. So that's
I kind of agree. I think that in terms of this, like the antagonist, if we're talking about Ben Cortman versus unnamed zombie, who
Alpha
is
male.
smarter than the average zombie, right? Makes a trap, I guess.
Versus alpha male.
It's the little character's name, the alpha vampire or something like that.
Yeah,
whatever. That's stupid, but okay. I mean,
no, I'm just saying that's what.
I'm not saying you're stupid. I'm saying that's a dumb thing for the movie to do. But all right.
When lacking a character, add description.
Yeah. I think that the book does a much better job in terms of that. If we're talking about that as the antagonist, I think that honestly, in terms of both of these works, the real antagonist is supposed to be the isolation of the character and his own, mind working against himself.
Yeah.
Which is shown pretty well in both. I think better in the book than the movie, but I think it's done all right in the.
Like I said, they have
film as well.
touches. They have touches.
It's just the level of it. Like, similar to what I was
killing
saying.
the dog off sooner would have been better, because that part that Ian mentioned about the maddening with moving Jake, and then when he actually goes back into the video store and says, "My friend wanted me to talk to you," stuff like that was gold, and I wanted more of that.
Yeah, I would have loved to see more of that type of stuff. I think that would have done the movie well,
and they could have had more of that.
Yeah, they could have for sure. I think
that
that
been nice.
I think that both Nevilles were pretty good.
Yep,
I think that
I'll agree with that.
I like Will Smith. I actually like Will Smith's character quite a bit in this. I think that was the one thing that felt like there was care and attention paid to it more than anything else in this movie. Just his characterization and him being a fleshed out person.
Yes, exactly.
I wasn't a huge fan of the supporting characters in the movie. I thought that they kind of glossed. They did too much with the family that he lost, and with all that time that they spent on it, did like nothing with it. I felt like, I felt like it was not the touching moment that they wanted it to be, or like the very like. They went too hard at like pull on your heartstrings in the middle of like a horror movie, and it didn't really work as well as they wanted to.
But when he goes to the house, right, and he says, "Don't open until Christmas," and he opens up and sees the nursery set deck, that said so much more.
That's so perfect,
It said so much more about him, said so much more about his situation than any of those flashbacks. I agree with you 100%, Steve.
Good. Well, I was going to say, I mostly could have done without the flashbacks. Maybe like a brief little something, and that would have made the film better, I think.
Yeah, all I was gonna say to back you up is like they almost felt like afterthoughts, like the flashbacks to his family. Like they were like, I don't know, like it wasn't enough there. Like you said, it was like they split down the middle, so therefore there wasn't enough either way to like hold on to.
Yeah.
But I think Sam was a good dog.
Sam was a good
very
dog.
good dog.
So I might give one disappointing for the film because of the first half with Sam in it.
On Sam's behalf.
Actually, Sam was the most
Tough call.
most important supporting character in that.
I mean, Sam was a better actor than Will Smith.
Well, they're on par. I think they acted against each other quite well. But yeah,
Don't worry about a thing.
it's gonna be all right.
All right, so that's kind of the characters. Let's talk about the dialogue. Scott, why don't you get into dialogue?
All right, this one's a little not difficult, but I'm not sure where to actually weigh either of them because while yes, they work, the dialogue in the novella worked perfectly fine. I think it was the weakest part of it to me, the least interesting part. Not saying it was bad, and I think it actually was a little bit below that. In fact, in the film, not to say it sucked or anything like that. I just think it does its job. It gets you from point A to point B. I think the more introspective parts, which the film didn't have the time to explore, might have like helped out there. But I don't know. I did like the conversation, I suppose, at the end in the novella between Neville and Ruth. Like that was interesting stuff. But of course, for the most part, he can't really talk to anybody, so it's a lot of internal monologue, or at least flashbacks to his family on when he had his wife and kid and what happened to them. So I just think like while certainly good enough to get you along, I think to me it was the least impressive part of both works, and even less impressive or less engaging, I guess I want to say, in the film. So that's how I kind of come down on it.
So someone made a point earlier of the fact that they wanted to see more of his isolation if they killed off the dog earlier. And I think that him being so nuts towards the end would have been sold better if we saw more of his isolation. Because it just feels like he's conversing well with his dog. He seems fairly normal, loses the dog, and then immediately is a social mess.
I guess. Yeah.
Like you had one night with the dog, and that sold you on their whole relationship. That one night in the dog, kill the dog the next day, and I can't believe I'm the one saying this. And then rebuild the character, like have like the middle half hour, his descent.
Yeah.
Because all it takes is that one night. You already know that he's the person. He speaks to the dog, and the other thing is the video he creates when he goes down to his lab.
Get rid of the flashbacks. Make all of that his descent into madness, and you got a good movie.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
That's a perfect
way to fix it.
I think that I agree with you, Scott. Like I wasn't like super impressed with the dialogue in either one of these. To be honest, I might be leaning towards giving the book a 0 just because there's nothing that like really stands out to me, and giving the movie a 1 because I like his dialogue with Sam. Like when he's talking to Sam, I feel like he's the most open and like just his like conversations with the dog as though it's his child, and like filling in for his kid, I think says a lot about his character and fills in a lot there.
But that also makes the later dialogue not mesh well for me.
It does both things. Yeah, true. That's what I want to say too. I will agree with that.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. It's a little tough for me.
I can see why you give it a 1. I don't think I'm going to. That was my point there.
That didn't. Yeah, I see exactly what you mean. That didn't like jump out to me while I was watching, but I could see how it would. Well, let me think about it. We got a couple more questions to go through anyway before we get to the point where I have to give you my score. So,
yeah, I mean, I made my point, so that's how I feel about it. Like, it's just a little sagging, a little under a 1 for me. So,
yeah. All right. Anybody else got anything on dialogue?
I'd be more inclined to give the book a 1 and the movie a 0 because, if we had more of his descent into madness, the movie just seemed to be more added exposition, and then it all fell to shit when Anna showed up. It really went sterilized. Whereas I felt that the book, its tedium actually, by the time he actually had somebody to in the present talk to, the dialogue is what it was for that period of time. But at least it said something. at least it conveyed some ideas.
That's fair.
There was some stuff happening there. Whereas the movie, it could have been that, and it fell short of that.
Were you not inspired by a speech about Bob Marley in the movie?
I'm always inspired by Bob Marley, but if somebody walks in your house and doesn't know who Bob Marley is, then
No, they knew who Damian Marley was, but didn't know who
That
Bob
was the
Marley
most immersion breaking thing, or it should be for any
So
audience.
stupid.
seriously,
I might give dialogue a 0 for that scene now that I remember that
yeah,
happened.
yep. If I was ever on the fence, that gave the movie a 0 dialogue.
God,
Good evidence.
what a forced scene of dialogue. Holy shit!
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right, what do you guys think about style? Actually, when I say what do you guys think, I'm gonna
Why don't you
this
start?
one. Yeah. So, I love the style of the book. I think it's like this very strange combination of like taking these old tales and trying to force is a bad word, but like trying to put a new
A modern spin on them.
or postmodern, as you mentioned, spin on them. I really like what it did. I like the breakdown. I like that it's pretty short too, which helps out. But like, it gets to the point. It was like 100-page novella or whatever it was, and it's something that develops in its own time, but doesn't have any wasted pages in there, which is nice.
Yes.
In terms of the movie, I actually like the style of the movie too.
I'll agree with that.
I think it's visually pretty solid, except for there were a couple times where CG looks bad.
The
But,
CG
like-
line at the beginning.
Yeah.
It wasn't too bad. It wasn't like, speaking of recent one, real quickly, it wasn't like 12 Monkeys, like really noticeable, but yeah, it was noticeable enough, I suppose.
Yeah. But I think for the most part, the cinematography is pretty good. I like the running leitmotif of like the Bob Marley song, like coming back up and like,
They can only afford one song.
yeah, exactly.
Clearly.
But it does kind of like outline their like emergent theme, I suppose, as they're going through it. So I think that's worked in pretty well. And did you guys notice the Batman versus Superman poster up there?
I was just about to
like-
say that the product placement in this film was almost not quite as nauseating as ET's was.
Yeah, listen,
There was
Warner Brothers.
Batman versus Superman was not to happen for another 10 years after this,
But they made the announcement.
11
and it's
years
Warner
ago.
Brothers property.
Warner Brothers, exactly. Steve, Warner Brothers is Warner Brothers, as Chris said, and they're obviously going to do that.
insane.
And yeah, I noticed that like immediately the second it came on screen.
Yeah,
I
the
kinda
Warner
love that
Brothers
it came
jerking
out
off
that-
was.
I kind of love that they were ballsy enough to put that in there, like, and then the movie didn't come out for another 8 years or
Whatever.
10 years or whatever it was.
No, so I'll speak briefly. Yes, I think the movie or the style of the movie I enjoyed quite a bit. I was saying the precast that I'm always kind of a sucker for the empty streets, post-apocalypse anything, and I think the shots in this one work quite well on that front. And then also when it gets more claustrophobic and stuff at nighttime, when he goes into that little building warehouse or whatever, I think that was really well shot. And then going to the novella, yeah, I think Matheson's style it's not fancy, but it's also not boring or stilted. It's kind of clear cut to the point, but he can also get some nice introspections, nice descriptions there. So,
By the way,
not bad.
quick trivia. Do you guys know that Matheson wrote for Twilight Zone?
Yeah, I was
No,
just
but it
about to
makes
mention
sense.
that.
Like,
He
I
wrote
should know
quite a bit for
that.
Twilight Zone, I think the early years. I read a review about this, and the person was like, the reviewer was like, there is nothing about any Matheson's earlier writing that like suggests that he could pull off something like this. It's like I was bewildered by the fact that this was so good. And I was like, all right.
Well, I mean, because I know Matheson was also pretty well known for westerns, that he didn't delve into genres or speculative fiction like he did with this or Hell's House or what he wrote for the Twilight Zone. I believe he might have written a story or two for The Outer Limits.
Hmm.
But
That
the thing I
also
like
makes
about
sense.
Matheson is he just tells you. He doesn't try any kind of artsy. He's not pretentious. He writes what he writes and how he writes. He doesn't try to be.
Listen to the audible version of
And it elevates
this.
the stuff I'm saying.
The joy that the narrator put into his scientific discoveries reminded me of the joy when I solve a programming problem. Like
So it adds a lot to it there.
then the tension they built in. Granted, I might have had a different experience reading it, but it was one of the best audiobooks I've listened to.
But
And I Oh, we'll get to recommendations in a second. But I want to speak about the empty streets. There's one scene in there where after the dog dies, and they keep expanding outwards from where he's sitting to really highlight how alone he is at this very moment. I thought that cinematography, they handled it very well in the film. So I'm going to give it a 1 for both.
What do you think, Chris?
So am I. But Ian, and to your point, that was like what you were saying about the robustness that the narrator put in, and I'm going to listen to that because the thing I like about Matheson's writing is that I hate when you say you tell it like it is, but he does. He doesn't try to be, any kind of. There's no artifice. It's very genuine. It's very upfront. It's very, very uncomfortable at times. Really uncomfortable at times.
Yeah, but I think effectively so. I think we're.
Yeah. Yeah, but I just want to make sure that was let you know. That was my whole point.
No, I appreciate that clarification.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, let's talk about recommendations.
Why don't you start,
Ian? Well, Ian, why don't you tell us what you thought about this?
Audiobook over film. Go.
Fair enough.
I think it's a 4.5 hour audiobook. And
that's nothing.
And I was enthralled the entire while driving around to various places. I was listening to I Am Legend, and I wonder if I would like the film more if I hadn't read and / listened to the novel or the novella first. I don't know, but I did, and I thought I could do nothing but pick at what I disliked about the film compared to the novella. So 0-1.
Yeah, so I'm basically following suit. While I did not listen to the audiobook, that sounds like a really good version of it for sure. You've hyped it up. But I mean, I enjoy reading the stories anyways, like sort of generally versus listening to anything in audio. So that's just my preference. But I do think it was a well-written story. I would recommend it. I wouldn't say the film like is bad or terrible or sucks, but I would just say if you're going to experience I Am Legend, you might as well read the original and don't worry about the film. Like it's fine, but really like it's not necessary. So I recommend the written work versus the film work, and that's how I sort of come down on it.
Chris?
If you decide you have to see one version of the theatrical film, see the director's cut. And it's hard because 60% of the film is good, but the ending just sucks. It really does. And, for any flaws that the book may have in the fact that it was written, 70 years ago now?
Yep, 52 or whatever.
Close to it. Whatever discrepancy there is with regard to the culture, as Ian and I were just talking about, is written in such a way that it's very easy to transplant yourself and interpret yourself because it is. So I think reading the book, I give the book a 1. I'm going to give the movie a 0. And for that matter, I'm going to say I have yet to see this book put to film where it's actually worthy of.
They do it justice.
Will Smith is about as close as it came. I mean, the actor, Will Smith and Sam were about the closest.
Oh, I do have one thing to say, though. I picture Neville looking like you, Steve-O.
He did have a big beard.
Big beard.
Big bushy beard?
Yep.
Versus the well-coiffed survivors of the apocalypse.
Will Smith really liked to keep himself shaved.
He was a military man, It makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
Even Ethan and Anna wandering the post-apocalypse of America looked quite
perfectly clean clothes.
like they just came out of a film trailer.
What I'll say is I enjoyed this film well enough. I probably give it a recommend. It's dumb popcorn like summer flick, right? But it's good enough. The book I much more highly recommend. I think that it is really well done. There are a couple things that may not translate so well to our modern sensibilities, I guess. There's like weird sexual stuff at one point.
Yeah, it's few and far between.
But it's for the most part it's fine. And like
he's saying what a lot of people are thinking. I mean, the thing is, it's like if you break it down the animalistic, and that's why it's uncomfortable, is because if you're by yourself and you're desperate, you might, And
also vampire lore, it's they seduce. It's whether it's Bela Lugosi or Twilight, it's all about sex, man.
Sure.
Twilight.
And I'm saying they make a point like the female vampires would like try to entice them out by like half stripping off and
right,
exactly.
So,
like psychologically warfaring.
like, I'm not trying to say it's a big thing, but you know, if you're
It is fair,
sensitive to any of that stuff, you might not like it. But like,
Sure. That's fair.
I think that the novel does a very good job going much more into the psychology of the survivor. Like I said, the movie is like summer popcorn fun. The novel is like psychological horror for a lot of it, and for that reason, I'm going to recommend them both. The novel much more, or the book much more highly than the movie. But
Sure.
I think if you're looking for like a way to kill a couple, like an hour and a half or whatever, however long it is, hour 40, watch the movie, watch the director's cut, and you know, you can have a good time. So why don't we go down everybody's scores?
Okay.
You guys want to just give your own scores? Yeah.
Yeah. So for the film, I've given it a 6. I take away 1 point for plot, 1 for dialogue, themes, and I do not recommend it. The novella, I did give it a 9. I just took a point away from dialogue because I felt that was the weakest part. Otherwise, it's damn solid.
All right.
So
Scott, could you repeat your movie thing again?
Say again? For the film, yeah. I took away a point for plot, Chris. Gave it a 0 to dialogue, recommend, and themes. So 6 and 9. 69, dudes. Nice.
Nice. All right. E, what do you got there?
All right, I gave the book an 8. I took off a point for dialogue and supporting. And I gave the film a 5. I took off a point for plot because I think that even though the middle of the film is its strongest point, the beginning and like the hunting scenes were good, I just think the ending, especially the theatrical ending, is garbage. Themes, because again, this is not an objective review. This is subjective because I'm comparing it to the other thing. So 1 point off for themes, 1 point off for antagonist, and 1 point off for dialogue.
Yeah, pretty similar.
And 1 point off for recommendation.
I'm going to come on the side of Ian. Because I'll give the plot a 2, themes a 0. Antagonist, I'm going to give a 0 because it was just monster movie of the week. I mean, for whatever flashes of character there were, I'm going to give it a 0. Ian made a compelling argument for Sam because I was about to give supporting a 0 because Sam was the only other character in the story. And I'm gonna give 0 dialogue and 0 recommend. So it's 2 per plot. So
5 for movie, I believe. You gave the same scores as Ian?
Yeah. And then for book, I'm gonna give it a 9.
What do you take off for?
I'm going to I'll tell you what. The plot I would probably give like a 2.5, and it was one of those things where I would like, because we're not doing a strict binary scale, let's just say I give it a 9.
Okay.
And then it's not a perfect book, that it does have some flaws, but overall I'm going to say it works more than it doesn't.
Cool. All right.
And the fact to me, I remembered the themes about the book more than I did a lot of the details. And to me, that in itself, because I read this about 25 years ago for the first time, the fact that carries through is worthy of at least a 9.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to give the book an 8. I take off 1 point for the plot, and I take off a point for dialogue.
Yep.
I think I'm coming down the same as Ian. I'm going to give the movie a 5. I take off 1 point for plot, 0 to themes, 0 antagonist, 0 supporting, actually, because Sam is a strong character. I like the dog, but all the other supporting characters are really weak. And 0 to dialogue. I'm going to give it a 1 on recommend, though, and unlike the rest of you guys. Sure. So I think we're mostly the same, right? Except for Scott, you gave a 6 to the movie.
Yeah.
And a 9 to the book.
Yep.
And Chris also gave a 9 to the book.
Yeah. It's fairly similar.
Making 8.5 overall and a 5.25 for the film.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty about right.
I think that's a good
for each.
Good wrap up there.
Yep.
I feel like I didn't introduce anybody at the beginning of this.
You did
episode.
not. So
well, let me introduce you now, and extroduce you, which is a word I just made up.
You. God.
Go on.
We're gonna define that later. So I have been your host, Steve Ramosi. We've been talking about I Am Legend, and I've been joined today by Scott Thurlow,
I'm not legend. I'm merely superstition.
Ian Manzer,
I prefer to go by Logan Swanson.
and Christopher Morgan.
Hold the garlic.
Thanks, guys, and we'll see you soon.
Editing and engineering by Jonathan Ian Manser. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.